Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I acknowledge my colleague who's given me an opportunity to speak on this bill. And I guess there have been some very generous speeches in the House today, and I'm perhaps a little less generous. It's not to be small-minded or picky, but I will acknowledge the work done of the government rather than praise, because there have been many, many parties pushing for this for some time. And I'd like to acknowledge and praise all of their efforts, Mr. Speaker. But the government does have a tendency towards tokenism. And across the board. This is not a token gesture in itself. No one of the largest marine sanctuaries in the world, and indeed 15% of our exclusive economic zone. And Labor has had a policy for many years of 10% of our marine areas in reserve status. And a lot of people, including the National Party, consistently have criticised us for that. Mr. Speaker, in one fine swoop, not one foul swoop, I have to say, in a fine swoop, we are effectively putting 15% into areas of protection. And that in itself is a wonderful thing. There would hardly be a person in this country that would want to criticise this. Indeed, from the fishing industry down, the fact that we've only identified $600,000 or thereabouts of commercial interest doesn't fully state, as was said by the ACT Party, the potential for huge economic benefit. And that applies also to the fishing industry around this area of protection. Because as we now understand, wherever we have a reserve or a protected area, the opportunity for fish species and other biodiversity to flourish and there spill outside the zone is also applies here for this Kermadec area. So there'll be fishing companies around the world, in fact, not just in New Zealand, who'll be eyeing the opportunity for this into the future. So the question is, can we ensure that what we are setting out to do here in the House today can indeed be upheld? That is the protection of this area and all the ecosystems within it, protection for future generations. Mr. Speaker, I can acknowledge that there will be more enthusiasm for this with the younger people of New Zealand, my daughter in particular, and what this will do for future generations and the opportunities to explore more what happens in this incredibly diverse area. And so we are taking action now to protect their opportunities. But in handing over to the Department of Conservation the responsibility for this, what I have to acknowledge in this House that the national government has done that with other areas, with protective areas in this country, Mr. Speaker, on land, but failed to fund the organisation to uphold the values and protect the values for which they so proudly speak of. So the question is, will we ensure that this government or future governments have the resources to protect the values that we're passing through in this legislation here? Mr. Speaker, we've got a Department of Conservation that is under-resourced. They're talking about car parking charges, about toilet fees, no doubt, or other things to try and fund the basic biodiversity work that is needed on land to protect our kiwis and our other threatened species. This reserve will protect many, many threatened species. And for that, we have to acknowledge the Minister and the government. But I ask of the Minister, and through the Select Committee process, I'm sure there will be questions around the resourcing of the department and all the flow-on departments, the Navy, Mr. Speaker, the government agencies that will be now responsible, or when this indeed is informed, will be responsible to protect the values which we are trying to pass through into legislation here, Mr. Speaker. It is indeed a huge area. 44, sorry, can I come back to one more point I'd like to make before I finish here? In protecting 15%, it's not fully representative of the different marine environments throughout New Zealand. So I ask of the government, will they ensure that the other areas or representations of the other areas and marine species also be protected? I personally support the Marine Protected Areas concept, but it's not perfect. Marine reserves are a difficult and torturous process to implement. But we do have areas of marine diversity in this country that need to be protected. And I ask of the government, will they ensure that they don't stop here because they say we've protected 15% of our exclusive economic zone, therefore haven't we done well? Will they move to protect and work with commercial interests and recreational interests to have a true range of protection across all the marine biodiversity? Mr. Speaker, this is a good piece of legislation. I acknowledge, if I find it difficult to praise the government, as I say, it's not to be small-minded, it's to say that this has been a long process to get the bill here. We hope that this will continue smoothly through the Select Committee, but I ask of the government, can they ensure that the resourcing for the department who will be responsible for this area and many other areas, both on and off land, will they be resourced to carry out their duties and the expectations from the public to protect our endangered species?